6 primary contemporary documents confirming Francis Bacon is Shakespeare. Many people who are unfamiliar with Baconian research seem to believe that the Baconian evidence for Francis Bacon writing the Shakespeare Works is all based on various cipher and code evidence of differing and various complexities. Nothing could be further from the truth. Here are 6 pieces of contemporary documentary evidence that are not based on ciphers, codes or anagrams, but are primary documents that firmly link Francis Bacon to the Shakespeare Works. Number 1. From 1594 to 1596, Francis Bacon's private notebook, The Promise, a major source for his Shakespeare poems and plays. In ordinary circumstances, this contemporary manuscript document would be well known to every Bacon and Shakespeare scholar and student of English literature around the world. Bacon's unique private notebook held at the British Library contains a total of 51 leaves, all written in his own hand. It contains 1,655 entries jotted down as an aid to his memory. The entries include single words, phrases, lines, turns of speech, metaphors, similes, aphorisms, and various moral and philosophical observations. These include entries drawn from the Bible, Latin, French, Italian, Spanish and English proverbs, and lines and verses from classical poets and dramatists, among them Virgil, Ovid, Seneca, Horace and Terence. It is the source of several hundred resemblances, correspondences and parallels found throughout the Shakespeare poems and plays. Number 2, from around 1596 to 7, Francis Bacon's own collection of manuscripts known as the Northumberland Manuscript, originally containing his 2 Shakespeare plays, Richard II and Richard III. The Bacon collection of manuscripts known as the Northumberland Manuscript, held at Alnwick Castle, contains various writings by Bacon, comprising letters, essays, religio-political treatises, dramatic devices, and originally held 2 of his Shakespeare plays, Richard II and Richard III. The outer cover of his collection of manuscripts contains references and links to his narrative Shakespeare poem, The Rape of Lucrece, and another 3 of his Shakespeare plays, Love's Labour's Lost, Romeo and Juliet, and The Merchant of Venice. Various forms of his name, Bacon and Francis Bacon, and pseudonyms Shakespeare and William Shakespeare, are scribbled all over its outer cover on around 20 occasions. Below, at the bottom of the outer cover, his pseudonym William Shakespeare is repeated numerous times, and as if to emphasise one more time Bacon is Shakespeare, we are met with the possessive entry, Your William Shakespeare. This is the only manuscript in the world where the names Bacon and Shakespeare appear together in a contemporary document. Number 3. Francis Bacon and his unique copy of the 1587 edition of Hollands' Chronicles, with marginal annotations in his own hand alongside passages used for his Shakespeare plays, the smoking gun of the true authorship of the Shakespeare Works. The 1587 second edition of Hollands' Chronicles was used by Shakespeare as one of the primary sources for his English history plays, covering the War of the Roses from Richard II to Richard III, and for Bacon's prose history of Henry VII, and his final English history play, Henry VIII. It is also a major source for one of his greatest tragedies, Macbeth, and for King Lear and Cymbeline. The title page of the 1587 Shakespeare Hollands has 5 elaborate monograms composed of the initials WS, formed in such a way that the pen never leaves the paper until completion in the flourish of a single stroke. Dr. Longworth de Chambron informs her readers that these personal monograms are found on the outer cover of the so-called Northumberland Manuscript. In fact, in her own words, anyone familiar with Shakespeare's personal copy of the Hollands' Chronicles, extensively annotated in his own hand, and the Northumberland Manuscript, with the names of Bacon and Shakespeare written all over its outer cover, would at a single glance know they originally belonged to the same man, of which there can be no doubt whatsoever. This unique annotated copy of Hollinshead's Chronicles is currently missing. Number 4, from around 1596. The so-called Derry manuscript of Henry IV, the unique and earliest known Shakespeare manuscript, originating from Bacon's literary workshop and corrected in his own hand. It is a little known fact that there exists an early manuscript version of the play Henry IV. This manuscript is the earliest extant manuscript of a Shakespeare play ever discovered. The so-called Derry manuscript is a single 5-act Shakespeare play of Henry IV and is earlier than the first printed quarto of the history of Henry IV issued in 1598 and the quarto edition of the second part of Henry IV printed in 1600. The manuscript represents the play as Bacon originally composed it, when it was one play and not two, before developing his original version into 2 separate parts. The so-called corrector's hand in the so-called Derry manuscript is Bacon's own cramped hand, as one would expect from the author of the play. Number 5. The 1623 Shakespeare First Folio. On its 400th anniversary, a recent work entitled The 1623 Shakespeare First Folio, a Baconian Rosicrucian Freemasonic allusion, uncovers and reveals unknown and untold secrets about the greatest work of literature in the history of humankind. It brings forth the many hidden connections of its author, Francis Bacon, and his Rosicrucian Freemasonry Brotherhood, with all the key members involved in its production, printing and publication. His hidden relationships with its printers William and Isaac Jaggard and the other members of the First Folio Consortium, John Smethwick, William Astley and its publisher Edward Blount. Dedicated to William Herbert, Earl of Pembroke, who was at the time of its dedication Grand Master of England, one half of the incomparable pair of brethren with his brother Philip Herbert, Earl of Montgomery, both of whom were very close friends of Francis Bacon. Number 6, from 1626. The Memoria, 32 Latin verses cryptically conveying Bacon is Shakespeare. In the months following the death of Francis Bacon to the world, his trusted Rosicrucian brother, Dr. William Rawley, gathered together and published a commemorative work in his honour entitled The Memoria. This rare volume contains 32 Latin verses in praise of Bacon, which his orthodox biographers and editors have simply passed over, ignored or suppressed, that portray Bacon as a secret supreme poet and dramatist, writer of comedies and tragedies under the pseudonym of Shakespeare. In the final elegy, the poet and dramatist Thomas Randolph refers to Bacon as Quirinus, the spear shaker, Pallas Athena, shaker of the spear, and Apollo, leader of the Muses, strikingly pointing to the fact that Bacon is our secret supreme poet and dramatist, Shakespeare.